Have you ever paused to think about how close you've been to danger without even knowing it? We guide you through these intense moments, one story at a time. But before you get lost in the narrative, take a moment to like this video and share where you're tuning in from. Now, let's immerse ourselves in these spine-tingling tales. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel to watch my latest videos as quickly as possible. Thank you very much. The Cellar Without an Exit. The Turner family, Mark, Sarah, and their 8-year-old daughter Emily, move into the old house on a brisk autumn morning. The house was situated at the edge of a quiet town in Maine, surrounded by a thick forest. Its Victorian architecture gave it a charm that Sarah couldn't resist when she first saw the listing. The price, suspiciously low for a property of its size, only added to its allure. "It's perfect," Sarah had said, clutching Mark's arm as they toured the house. "We'll make so many memories here." Mark, ever the pragmatist, had hesitated. "It's old, Sarah. There's probably a ton of things that need fixing." But Sarah had been insistent, and Mark, worn down by her enthusiasm, had finally agreed. By the time they moved in, they were both optimistic about their fresh start. Emily, for her part, was ecstatic about having her own room with a view of the woods. As they began unpacking, they noticed the quirks of the old house. The floors creaked under their weight, and the walls seemed to whisper as the wind blew through unseen cracks. But these were just part of the house's character, Sarah assured herself. It was on their second day in the house that Mark stumbled upon the cellar. He had been clearing out the clutter in the basement, a dank, unfinished space that smelled faintly of mildew. Hidden behind an old wooden cabinet was a door he hadn't noticed before. It was made of thick, weathered wood, and an ancient iron padlock hung from its handle. "What do you think is in there?" Sarah asked, peering over his shoulder. Mark shrugged. "Storage, maybe? Or an old storm shelter?" Emily, standing nearby, chimed in excitedly. "Maybe it's a treasure room, like pirates." Mark chuckled. Only one way to find out. He fetched his toolbox and spent the better part of an hour trying to break the lock. When it finally gave way with a groan, the door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "It's cold down there," Sarah said, rubbing her arms. "Stay here," Mark instructed. He grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs. The beam of light revealed stone walls covered in cobwebs and dirt. The air was thick, carrying a damp, earthy smell that made Mark's nose wrinkle. At the bottom of the stairs, the room opened up into a small chamber. The walls were covered in drawings, crudely scrawled in what looked like black charcoal. At first glance, they seemed like simple doodles, stick figures, houses, and animals. But as Mark looked closer, he noticed something off. The figures were distorted. Their faces were smudged, their limbs too long, and their eyes, just dark, empty circles, seemed to follow him wherever he moved. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Nothing down here but some creepy old drawings," he called out, his voice echoing unnaturally. He quickly climbed back up and closed the door, ignoring the faint sense of unease that had settled over him. That night, as the family settled into their new home, Emily woke them with a scream. Mark and Sarah rushed to her room to find her sitting upright in bed, tears streaming down her face. "What is it, sweetie?" Sarah asked, holding her close. "I heard someone," Emily sobbed. "They were calling me from downstairs." Mark's stomach tightened. "Are you sure?" Emily nodded. "It was a little girl. She said, 'Come down and play.'" Mark and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances. "It's just your imagination," Sarah said soothingly. "Moving to a new house can be scary. But there's no one else here, I promise." Emily seemed to accept this explanation, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few nights, the house grew increasingly unsettling. It started with faint noises, the sound of footsteps in empty rooms, a faint whisper carried by the wind. Then came the scratching. It began late at night, a soft, persistent sound that seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. Mark searched the basement for signs of rodents but found nothing. Still, the scratching continued, growing louder each night. By the fourth night, it was accompanied by faint tapping on the walls. That's when Sarah decided they needed to do something about the cellar. I can't sleep knowing that thing is down there, she said. They moved a heavy piece of furniture in front of the door and locked it with a chain. But that only seemed to make things worse. The following morning, Mark went to check the cellar. He pulled the furniture aside and unlocked the chain, expecting to find nothing. But when he opened the door, he froze. A new drawing had appeared on the wall. It was a single phrase, scrawled in large, jagged letters. "Don't lock me in." Mark's heart raced. The letters looked as though they'd been scratched into the stone with fingernails. He slammed the door shut and called Sarah. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. But Sarah wasn't convinced. "Mark, it's probably just, I don't know, old graffiti we didn't notice before. You're overreacting." Mark knew better, but he didn't want to argue. That night, he barely slept, listening to the sounds of the house groaning and shifting around them. And then the whispers began again. This time, they were clearer. "Let me out." By the next morning, the family's nerves were frayed. Emily refused to go near the cellar, and Mark began making plans to sell the house. But before they could leave, everything came to a head. That night, the noises reached a fever pitch. The scratching became pounding, shaking the walls of the house. Emily screamed from her bedroom, and when Mark and Sarah rushed in, they found her standing in the corner, pointing at the wall. "She's here," Emily whispered. The wall was vibrating, as though something on the other side was trying to break through. Mark grabbed his family and ran for the front door. But as they reached it, the pounding stopped. The house felt eerily silent. The next day, the Turner family was gone. The neighbors noticed their car still in the driveway, but saw no sign of them. When the police were called to investigate, they found the house empty. The cellar door was wide open. In the darkness below, the walls were covered in new drawings. The last one showed the silhouettes of 4 figures, surrounded by hollow, staring eyes. The house without reflections. Anna and Tom had been searching for months before they found the house. Nestled at the edge of a quiet suburb just outside Seattle, it was a charming 2-story home with ivy creeping up the brick walls and a sprawling garden that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. The listing had described it as a rare find, and the price seemed too good to be true. "This is it," Anna had whispered to Tom as they walked through the house during the open house. She was already envisioning family dinners in the dining room, lazy Sunday mornings in the sunlit living room, and the potential nursery upstairs. Tom had been hesitant. "The price is odd, and the house feels, I don't know, empty, like something's missing." The realtor had overheard and offered a tight smile. "The previous owners removed all the mirrors. It's a personal thing, I think, but you can add your own, of course." Anna brushed it off. "It's just mirrors, Tom. We could put some up after we move in. It'll be perfect." Tom reluctantly agreed. They signed the paperwork the following week, and by the end of the month, the house was theirs. Anna and Tom's first few days in the house were a flurry of unpacking and settling in. The emptiness Tom had mentioned lingered, though neither of them could quite put a finger on why. The rooms were well lit, the walls freshly painted, and the floors polished to a shine. But there was a strange, pervasive silence that seemed to swallow their voices and footsteps. Anna noticed the lack of mirrors more than Tom did. She found herself instinctively turning toward walls, expecting to see her reflection, only to be met with blank space. It was unnerving. By the end of their first week, she decided to do something about it. She picked out a large, ornate mirror at an antique shop in town. It was framed in dark wood with intricate carvings that gave it a vintage charm. When she hung it in the living room, it seemed to brighten the space instantly. That night, as she was tidying up, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She paused, adjusting her hair, but something made her linger. There was something about her reflection that felt off. Her movements seemed just a fraction out of sync, like a poorly dubbed film. She chalked it up to fatigue and went to bed. The following days were uneventful, though Anna couldn't shake the strange feeling whenever she passed the mirror. Tom didn't seem to notice anything, which reassured her at first. But then one evening, as she was walking past the mirror, she froze. Her reflection wasn't walking past with her. Instead, it stood still, staring back at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, and the reflection blinked back, now perfectly synchronized. She laughed nervously, convincing herself she'd imagined it. But the incidents continued. Sometimes, she'd catch her reflection moving just a second too late. Other times, it seemed to smile when she wasn't. Once, she swore she saw someone else standing behind her in the reflection, a dark figure with hollow eyes. But when she turned, the room was empty. Tom dismissed her concerns. "It's an old mirror, Anna. Maybe the glass is warped or something. You're overthinking it." But Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She started avoiding the living room altogether. Determined to prove to herself that it was all in her head, Anna decided to buy another mirror. This one was a simpler design with a sleek, modern frame. She hung it in their bedroom, reasoning that a new mirror might help her feel more at ease. At first, everything seemed fine, but a few nights later, she woke up to a faint noise. It sounded like whispering, soft and indistinct. She nudged Tom, but he was fast asleep. The whispering seemed to grow louder, coming from the direction of the mirror. Anna turned her head slowly. In the darkness, she could just make out the faint outline of her reflection. But it wasn't lying down. It was sitting up, staring directly at her. Anna screamed, waking Tom. He turned on the light, but the reflection was normal again. She tried to explain what she'd seen, but Tom brushed it off as a bad dream. "Maybe you're just stressed," he said. "The move's been a lot. Let's take a weekend off. Go somewhere to relax." They planned a short trip, hoping the time away would help. But before they left, Anna decided to cover both mirrors with sheets. She didn't want to see them when they got back. When they returned from their trip, the house felt different. It was colder, darker, and the silence was heavier than before. Anna noticed it immediately, though Tom seemed oblivious. She went to uncover the mirrors, but froze when she reached the living room. The sheet she'd placed over the mirror was on the floor, crumpled as if it had been thrown. The mirror itself was smeared with handprints, small, pale prints that didn't belong to either of them. In the bedroom, the sheet over the second mirror was also gone. This time, there were no handprints, but the glass was cracked, as though something had struck it from the inside. Anna's unease turned to fear. She begged Tom to leave the house, but he refused. "We can't just run every time something weird happens," he said. "It's just a coincidence." That night, Anna slept with the lights on. The following days were a blur of terror. Anna started hearing voices when she was alone in the house. They were faint at first, like distant murmurs, but they grew louder over time. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but they seemed to come from the mirrors. One evening, as she was cleaning the living room, she glanced at the mirror and froze. Her reflection wasn't alone. Standing behind her was the shadowy figure she'd seen before, its hollow eyes staring directly at her. She spun around, but the room was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. Desperate, Anna called a local historian to ask about the house. The man's voice grew somber when she mentioned the mirrors. "That house has a history," he said. "The original owner was obsessed with mirrors. He believed they were portals to another world. After his wife and child disappeared, he started smashing every mirror in the house. People say he saw things in them." Anna hung up, her hands trembling. She told Tom everything, but he still refused to leave. "We'll replace the mirrors with new ones," he said. "It'll be fine." The night it all came to a head, Anna was alone in the house. Tom had gone on a work trip, leaving her with her mounting paranoia. She avoided the mirrors as best she could, but as the night wore on, the whispering returned. It started faintly, then grew louder, echoing through the house. Anna grabbed her phone and called Tom, but the line crackled with static. A chilling voice cut through the noise. "You can't leave." Panicking, Anna ran to the living room. The mirror was glowing faintly, the surface rippling like water. Her reflection stepped forward, smiling unnaturally. Behind it, the shadowy figure loomed, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. Anna screamed and backed away, but her reflection stepped through the glass. She felt icy hands grip her shoulders, pulling her toward the mirror. She struggled, but the force was too strong. The last thing she saw before being dragged into the glass was her own terrified face staring back at her. When Tom returned the next day, the house was silent. Anna was nowhere to be found. The mirrors, however, were pristine, their surfaces gleaming as though they'd been freshly polished. As Tom stood in the living room, staring at the ornate mirror, he swore he saw Anna's face staring back at him, her mouth open in a silent scream. Anna was never seen again. But to this day, those who pass by the house claim they sometimes see a woman's face in the windows, her hollow eyes filled with despair. The Silent House on Maple Drive. It was the first time Mia had ever purchased a house by herself. After years of scrimping and saving, the 30-year-old librarian finally had enough for a down payment. The house on Maple Drive seemed perfect. 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a backyard large enough for a small garden. It even came with a quaint attic space that Mia planned to use as a reading nook. The price was surprisingly affordable, almost suspiciously so, but the realtor, a tired-looking woman named Karen, assured Mia there was no catch. "It's been on the market for a while," Karen admitted, glancing down at her clipboard. "People just don't stay long, you know? But it's a great house, and I'm sure you'll love it." Mia shrugged off the realtor's vague explanation, chalking it up to bad luck for the previous owners. She signed the paperwork and moved in within a week. From the moment Mia stepped into the house, she felt an odd energy. It wasn't threatening, not at first, but there was an undeniable weight to the air. The house seemed to exhale with every creak of the wooden floors, every groan of the old pipes. The first night passed uneventfully, though Mia woke up several times, certain she'd heard faint whispers. She blamed the noises on the house, settling, and went back to sleep, pulling the blanket over her head. The next day, as she unpacked boxes, she heard it again. A faint murmur like someone speaking in another room. She paused, her hand still clutching a stack of books, and strained to listen. The voice was indistinct, a low hum that seemed to come from the walls. "Hello," Mia called, her voice shaky. Silence. She laughed nervously. "Get a grip, Mia," she muttered, returning to her work. But as the days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder. They were most prominent at night, rising and falling like waves. Mia would lie in bed, heart racing, as disjointed words drifted through the darkness. Sometimes, she thought she heard her name. While exploring the attic one afternoon, Mia stumbled upon a small, locked door. It was built into the wall, its edges almost camouflaged against the wood paneling. The door was no taller than 3 feet and had a rusted padlock securing it shut. Curiosity burned in Mia's chest. She searched the attic for a key, but found nothing. The realtor hadn't mentioned a locked door, and it wasn't in the listing. Mia made a mental note to call Karen about it, but decided to let it go for the time being. That night, as she lay in bed, she dreamed of the door. In her dream, the padlock was gone, and the door creaked open to reveal a long, dark tunnel. A figure stood at the end, shrouded in shadow, its face obscured. The whispers surrounded her, louder than ever, forming a chant she couldn't understand. Mia woke up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. She glanced toward the attic door at the end of the hallway, half expecting it to swing open. But everything was still. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves outside. It started with small things. Objects Mia was certain she'd left in one place would appear in another. Her keys, usually kept on a hook by the door, were found on the kitchen counter. Books disappeared from shelves, only to reappear days later stacked neatly on the dining table. One evening, Mia returned home from work to find all the lights in the house turned on. She was certain she'd turned them off before leaving. As she walked through the house, switching them off, she felt a presence behind her. It was subtle, like the sensation of being watched. She spun around, but the room was empty. The whispers grew louder that night. Mia sat in bed, clutching a flashlight, as the voices seemed to close in around her. She thought she saw a shadow move across the hallway, but when she peeked out, nothing was there. By now, she was too scared to sleep. She stayed awake, scrolling through her phone for anything that might explain the house's strange phenomena. She stumbled upon a forum about haunted houses and typed out a desperate post. Within minutes, replies poured in. Most were unhelpful, but one caught her attention. Asterisk, check the history of the house. Some places have memories. Asterisk. The next day, Mia visited the local library and dug into the house's history. What she found made her blood run cold. The house had been built in the early 1900s by a man named Edgar Blackwood. He'd lived there with his wife and young daughter. According to old newspaper clippings, Edgar was a reclusive man with a fascination for the occult. Neighbors reported hearing strange chants and seeing unusual symbols carved into the trees around the property. One night, Edgar's wife and daughter vanished without a trace. The authorities suspected foul play, but no evidence was ever found. Edgar continued living in the house for several years until he, too, disappeared. The house changed hands many times after that, but no one stayed for long. Mia's hands shook as she closed the last file. The whispers, the shadow, the locked door, everything made sense now. She felt an overwhelming urge to leave, but something held her back. It was as if the house itself wouldn't let her go. That night, Mia dreamed of the locked door again. This time, the padlock snapped open with a deafening crack, and the door swung wide. She could see the shadowy figure more clearly now. It had no face, just a swirling void where its features should have been. It raised an arm and pointed at her, its voice a low growl. Come closer. Mia woke with a start, the sound of the voice still echoing in her ears. She felt an irresistible pull toward the attic. Her feet moved as if guided by an unseen force. When she reached the attic, she saw the locked door, but the padlock was gone. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward. A faint light glowed at the bottom, pulsing like a heartbeat. Mia hesitated, but the pull was too strong. She descended the stairs, her breath shallow, her pulse racing. At the bottom of the staircase was a small room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like ash. In the center of the room stood a mirror, its surface rippling like water. The whispers were deafening now, rising to a crescendo. Mia stepped closer to the mirror, unable to resist. As she peered into it, she saw her reflection twist and warp. Behind her stood the shadowy figure, its void-like face inches from hers. "You're home," it said, its voice a chilling rasp. Mia screamed as the figure reached out and pulled her into the mirror. The last thing she saw was her own terrified face, distorted in the glass. Days later, Mia's disappearance made the local news. Her friends and family searched tirelessly, but there was no trace of her. The house was eventually put back on the market, the locked door in the attic mysteriously sealed once again. Some say Mia's spirit lingers in the house. At night, passersby claim to hear whispers coming from the attic or see a shadowy figure standing in the window. And if you're brave enough to enter, you might catch a glimpse of her face in the mirror, her hollow eyes staring back at you, begging for release. If you enjoy spine-chilling stories and mysterious legends, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of my newest videos. Your support helps us bring more thrilling content your way. Join the adventure and be part of the community today.